Close your eyes and imagine a narrow country road in rural Mississippi, the rust-red earth peeking through patches of clover, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and turned soil. It is the mid-1950s, a time when the American South moves at the pace of a porch swing, each afternoon stretching long and slow beneath a canopy of loblolly pines. The sun, already beginning its descent, spills a warm amber light across a small wooden farmhouse, its tin roof catching the last bright rays before dusk. A rooster crows faintly in the distance, not as a call to work, but as a reminder that life here is measured in seasons, in planting and harvest, in the gentle rhythm of livestock settling down for the night. On the front steps, a little girl sits with her grandmother, the older woman's hands busy shelling butter beans, the pods making a soft popping sound in the quiet. This is the world of Kosciusko, a speck on the map of Atala County, and it is here, on a winter day in 1954, that a child named Oprah Winfrey is born into humble, unhurried beginnings. That small farmhouse, with its creaking floorboards and walls papered with faded floral patterns, belonged to Hattie Mae Lee, Oprah's maternal grandmother, who would become the first caretaker of this curious, wide-eyed infant. There was no running water inside the house, so water was drawn from a well out back, the handle groaning softly as it lifted the cool, mineral-tinged liquid from deep within the earth. In the evenings, kerosene lamps cast a flickering orange glow across the room, painting dancing shadows on the ceiling while moths tapped gently against the glass chimneys. Oprah's earliest bed was nothing more than a dresser drawer pulled open and lined with soft cotton blankets, a makeshift cradle that spoke of resourcefulness and warmth rather than want. Grandmother Hattie Mae would rock that drawer gently, humming old spirituals that floated through the small house like a lullaby stitched into the very air. The child felt safe, wrapped in the scents of wood smoke, lye soap, and sun-dried linen, surrounded by the deep, steady quiet of the countryside. It was a world where the loudest sounds were the wind rustling through the cornfields and the distant bark of a farm dog. In those early mornings, before the sun had fully risen, Hattie Mae would sit young Oprah on the front porch, and together they would watch the world wake up. A thin mist would cling to the low places in the fields, turning the landscape into a watercolor of soft grays and pale greens. The grandmother, a woman of deep faith and even deeper dignity, would point to the birds flitting from fence post to fence post, naming them in a voice barely above a whisper. She taught the little girl to read by tracing letters on a well-worn Bible, her finger moving slowly across the delicate tissue paper, the words spoken aloud with a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. It was here, on that porch, that the foundation of a remarkable voice was laid, not the voice that would one day fill television studios, but a quieter, more profound voice that learned to listen, to observe the world with patience and tenderness. The smell of biscuits baking drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the earthy fragrance of the garden, and the child drank it all in, her young mind swelling with curiosity and a deep-seated sense of being loved. The farm itself was a kingdom of simple marvels. Oprah would toddle behind her grandmother to the outhouse, a small wooden structure set back among the pecan trees, its door swinging with a soft creak. She learned to gather eggs from the henhouse, her small fingers closing around them with the utmost care, feeling their warmth against her palm. In the afternoons, she would sit on an overturned wooden bucket and watch the pigs root lazily in the cool mud, their grunts a low, comical bass note in the symphony of the farm. Butterflies, yellow and white, fluttered among the buttercups that grew wild along the fence line, and the little girl would chase them with a joy that was entirely free of ambition or hurry. Each day was a gentle unfolding, a series of small tasks and quiet pleasures that built a strong, steady rhythm in her heart. The sunsets were spectacular in their subtlety, the sky bleeding into shades of lavender and soft peach, while the silhouettes of oak trees stood like patient guardians against the fading light. Night came softly, bringing a blanket of stars so thick and bright that it seemed the heavens were leaning down to listen to the earth's quiet breath. Hattie Mae was not alone in shaping the child's early understanding of the world. The community of Kosciusko, with its unpaved roads and clapboard churches, was a tightly knit tapestry of family, faith, and mutual care. On Sunday mornings, the air would fill with the sound of bells ringing from the small Baptist church, their chimes rolling across the hills like a gentle summons. Oprah would be dressed in a starched white dress, her hair brushed and braided with ribbons that matched the pale blue sky. Walking hand in hand with her grandmother along the dusty road, she would see neighbors emerge from their homes, each person acknowledging the others with a nod, a smile, a quiet "good morning." Inside the church, the wooden pews glowed with the patina of age, and the sunlight streamed through simple stained glass windows, scattering jewel-toned reflections onto the floor. The congregation's singing rose and fell in a timeless cadence, voices blending into a tapestry of hope and endurance that wrapped around the child like a protective cloak. It was here, amid the worn hymnals and the fluttering paper fans, that Oprah first experienced the power of a shared story, the way a voice could lift a room and make every heart beat in unison. But life in Kosciusko was not meant to be permanent. Before long, the child's mother, Vernita Lee, a woman who had traveled north to Milwaukee in search of work, sent word that she was ready for her daughter to join her. The announcement came not with fanfare, but as a quiet shift in the household conversation, a new chapter written in the careful plans of the adults. The grandmother began packing a small cardboard suitcase, folding the simple cotton dresses and the one good pair of Sunday shoes with infinite tenderness. The little girl, not yet fully grasping the distance, watched the preparations with wide, solemn eyes, sensing that the familiar sense of the farm and the soft creak of the porch swing would soon become memories. The morning of her departure, the sky was overcast, the air heavy with the threat of rain but not yet crying. The old pickup truck that would take them to the bus station waited in the yard, its engine a low, patient rumble. Hattie Mae knelt down on that rust-red earth, looked the child straight in the eye, and told her that she was special, that she would one day be somebody, not because of fame or fortune, but because she had a light inside her that could not be extinguished. Those words, whispered like a prayer, sank deep into Oprah's soul, and she carried them as she climbed into the truck and watched the only home she had ever known grow smaller and smaller in the rear window. The journey north was a slow, rumbling passage through a changing landscape. From the back seat of the old vehicle, the little girl watched as the pine forests of Mississippi gradually gave way to the gentle hills of Tennessee, then the wide, dark ribbon of the highway unspooled through Kentucky and beyond. Through the streaked window, she saw small towns flash by, each with its own water tower and white-steepled church, each a miniature painting of American life. The bus station, when they finally reached it, was a cavern of echoes and shadows, the sound of announcements crackling through old speakers, the smell of diesel and coffee hanging in the air. Grandmother Hattie Mae pressed a small bag into the child's hands, a sack of fried chicken wrapped in wax paper, still faintly warm, the last taste of home. Then came the moment of farewell, the long embrace, the whispered blessings, and the sight of the grandmother standing on the platform, her figure growing smaller as the silver bus pulled away, carrying the young girl into a future as wide and unknown as the northern sky. The sun set somewhere over the horizon, staining the clouds apricot and rose, and Oprah fell asleep to the hum of the tires, dreaming of farmhouse dreams, the rust-red earth still clinging to her shoes. When the morning light finally crept through the bus windows, the world outside was transformed. The rural expanse had given way to the outskirts of a city, the first signs of Milwaukee appearing in the form of smokestacks, row houses, and the glint of Lake Michigan in the distance. There were no chickens pecking in the yard here, no well to draw water from. Instead, the air smelled of industry and damp concrete. Yet, even in this new, unfamiliar setting, the seeds planted in the peaceful Mississippi soil remained. The little girl held on to the memory of the farmhouse silence, the kerosene lamp's glow, the sound of her grandmother's humming, and the gentle creak of the porch swing. These images would become a private sanctuary, a quiet place she could return to whenever the world grew too loud. As the bus eased into the station and the doors opened with a hiss of compressed air, Oprah Winfrey, still only a child, stepped down into a new life, carrying with her the stillness of the countryside, the warmth of a dresser-drawer bed, and a heart full of promise. The city of Milwaukee in the early 1960s was a patchwork of industrious sounds and close-packed neighborhoods, a place where the promise of work had drawn thousands of families from the South. For Oprah, recently arrived from the wide-open quiet of Mississippi, this new environment was a symphony of unfamiliar noises, streetcars clanging along tracks, the distant hum of factories, the sudden laughter of children playing in alleyways. She lived with her mother Vernita in a series of small apartments, each one a temporary harbor in a bustling urban sea. Inside these modest rooms, the light was often filtered through lace curtains, creating shifting patterns on the worn linoleum floors as the sun moved across the sky. The kitchen was the heart of this new life, a narrow space with a small formica table where the steam rising from a pot of soup would fog the window and blur the view of the brick building next door. In those early days, the little girl learned to navigate a world that felt both exciting and overwhelming, a place where privacy was scarce and silence even more so, but where love, however stretched and strained, still found a way to seep through the cracks. Vernita was a woman of remarkable endurance, working long hours as a housemaid to keep food on the table and a roof overhead. Her days began in the blue-gray light before dawn, the sound of her footsteps soft and hurried as she prepared to leave for work. Oprah, still small enough to curl into a tight ball on her cot, would sometimes wake just enough to see her mother silhouetted against the kitchen window, a cup of coffee warming her hands. Then Vernita would slip out the door, and the child would be left in the care of a parade of neighbors or, at times, her own resourceful imagination. The hours stretched before her like an empty canvas, and she filled them by sitting quietly at that kitchen table, a pencil in hand, tracing letters onto pieces of scrap paper. She had already learned to read with her grandmother, but now, in the solitude of the apartment, reading became not just a skill but a refuge. She would sound out the words of old newspapers, making stories from the fragments she found, her voice a whisper in the otherwise silent room. The radiator hissed gently in the corner, its warmth a small comfort against the chill of the northern winter. Despite the hardships, there were pockets of joy and tenderness in that Milwaukee childhood. Sunday afternoons carried a special warmth, a brief pause in the week's demands, and Vernita often used those hours to teach her daughter small, domestic rituals. Together they would stand at the kitchen counter, flour dusting the air like a fine snow, as they kneaded dough for biscuits. The mother's hands, strong and capable from years of scrubbing floors, showed the girl how to press and fold, the rhythm of the work soothing and steady. Light would pour through the window, catching the flour particles in a golden shaft, and, for a moment, the tiny apartment felt expansive, almost sacred. After the biscuits were placed in the oven, they would sit together, and Vernita would talk about her own childhood, about the Mississippi she had left behind, her voice carrying a blend of nostalgia and resolve. These conversations were not long or dramatically revealing. They were simple threads in a quiet tapestry, but through them Oprah learned about resilience, about the softness that can coexist with strength, about the importance of having a story and telling it. The child also found a strange, magnetic pull toward the world outside the apartment walls, particularly the local library, a grand brick building that stood like a fortress of calm on a tree-lined street. Inside, the air was cool and still, filled with the scent of old paper and lemon polish. The reading rooms were lit by tall windows that let in a diffused, milky light, and the heavy wooden tables bore the marks of countless elbows and pens. Oprah would push open the heavy door and step into that hush, feeling as though she were entering another world entirely. The librarians, kind women with glasses on chains and cardigans draped over their shoulders, grew to know her face. She would settle into a corner with a stack of books, biographies of great women, stories of faraway lands, collections of poetry that she did not fully understand but felt deeply. Time would dissolve as she turned page after page, the distant sound of a clock ticking the only measure of the afternoon. In that library, the small girl from Mississippi, living in a cramped apartment and often wearing hand-me-down clothes, discovered that her mind could travel anywhere, that she could be anyone. It was a quiet, profound liberation. Yet, the Milwaukee years were not without their shadows. The demands of poverty, the long absences of Vernita, and the child's own deep sensitivity created a loneliness that sat heavy in her chest. There were evenings when Oprah sat at the window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one, the amber bulbs casting pools of light on the wet pavement. She could hear the sounds of other families through the thin walls, laughter, arguments, the murmur of television sets, and she felt a yearning that she could not yet name. Sometimes she would talk to herself, not out of madness, but out of a need for companionship, creating imaginary friends and dialogues in the quiet of her room. These were moments of quiet sadness, yes, but also of remarkable creativity. Her inner life grew rich and detailed, and the habit of self-reflection took root. She learned to observe her own feelings with the same attention she gave to a book, turning them over and over in her mind. This introspection would one day become a powerful tool for connection, but for now, it was simply a way to survive the quiet ache of an empty kitchen and a mother who was doing her very best. The city of Milwaukee itself became a silent teacher. Its streets, lined with elm trees that rustled green in the summer and stood stark and beautiful in the winter, offered a landscape for wandering and wondering. In the warmer months, Oprah would walk along the sidewalks, her shoes tapping a gentle rhythm, past corner stores with their neon signs humming, past the barber shop where men gathered to talk, past the church whose doors were always open. The air would carry the scent of frying onions and the distant, briny coolness of Lake Michigan. She would sometimes end up at the lakefront, where the vast expanse of water stretched to the horizon, a deep blue that met the sky in a seamless line. Sitting on a bench, she would watch the waves lap against the rocks, the seagulls circling overhead with their mournful, graceful cries. The scale of the lake reminded her of the Mississippi fields she had left behind. Both were vast, both held mysteries beyond the edge of sight. Both made her feel small and large at the same time. These solitary moments by the water were a kind of prayer, a communion with something unsayable, and they filled her with a calm that sustained her through the less peaceful times. As Oprah grew, her voice began to find its outlet, though not yet on a stage. She started speaking in church, standing in front of the congregation with her heart beating like a small drum, delivering Easter speeches and Christmas recitations with a clarity that stunned the adults in the pews. Those moments, bathed in the colored light from the windows, felt natural to her, as though the words were simply waiting to be set free. The church members would nod and smile, and some would lean over to Vernita and whisper, "That child is gifted." It wasn't a prediction of fame, but a recognition of something genuine, a light that burned steadily. Back in the apartment, she would stand in front of the mirror and pretend she was speaking to an audience of thousands, using a hairbrush as a microphone, her reflection illuminated by the soft glow of a single bulb. In those make-believe sessions, the loneliness of the day would recede, replaced by a sense of purpose she couldn't yet define. The kitchen table, the library corner, the lakefront bench, the church pulpit, each was a stage in its way, a place where Oprah practiced the art of being fully present. Then, once again, change arrived. The arrangement with Vernita, stretched thin by work and other pressures, could no longer hold. Word came that Oprah would be sent to Nashville to live with her father, Vernon Winfrey, a barber and businessman whose steady, disciplined household offered a different kind of promise. The day of departure, the Milwaukee sky was a pale gray, the streets slick with a recent rain. A small suitcase stood by the door, packed not by grandmother Hattie Mae this time, but by the young girl herself, her few belongings tucked between the folds of her Sunday dress. The goodbye with Vernita was quiet, complicated, a hug that carried all the unsaid things between them. Then the train journey south, the landscape once again reversing, city giving way to suburb, suburb to farmland, the skyscrapers of the north fading into memory. As the train clattered along, Oprah pressed her forehead to the cool glass and watched the world pass, her mind a collage of the life she was leaving and the one she was moving toward. She did not cry. Instead, she breathed in the rhythm of the wheels, a steady, calming sound, and she carried with her the library stillness, the kitchen table warmth, and the deep, watery blue of the lake. Nashville, Tennessee, in the late 1960s presented itself as a city of green hills and old brick storefronts, a place where the traditions of the South blended with the emerging rhythms of a new era. For the teenage Oprah, stepping off the train with her small suitcase, it was a world of defined order and clear expectations. Her father, Vernon Winfrey, awaited her at the station, a tall, serious man with a barber's steady hands and a businessman's unwavering gaze. He drove her through tree-lined streets to his home, a modest but impeccably kept house where the lawn was trimmed to perfect evenness and the front porch held a single rocking chair, as if waiting for contemplation. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and a hint of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Inside, the atmosphere was quiet but charged with a sense of purpose. This was not the farmhouse freedom of Kosciusko, nor the urban independence of Milwaukee. This was a home governed by rules, timetables, and a deep-rooted belief in the power of education. Vernon, a man who had built his own barbershop and served on the city council, intended to raise a disciplined, studious young woman, and he set about the work with the same precision he used to shape a gentleman's haircut. Vernon's barbershop, located on a corner in a working-class neighborhood, became a central landscape in Oprah's Nashville years. The shop was a long, narrow room with black-and-white checkerboard linoleum, 3 sturdy barber chairs, and a wall of mirrors that doubled the warm glow of the overhead lights. The scent of talcum powder, bay rum aftershave, and steaming towels filled the space, creating an atmosphere that was at once masculine and deeply comforting. On Saturday afternoons, the shop was a vibrant social hub, men gathering not just for haircuts, but for the slow, meandering conversations that are the lifeblood of community. From behind the counter, where she was tasked with sweeping hair clippings and organizing the magazine rack, Oprah listened. She heard the men discuss politics, sports, religion, and the daily triumphs and struggles of their lives. Their voices rose and fell in a kind of music, and she absorbed it all, learning the cadences of debate and the power of a well-told story. Vernon rarely praised her in public, but his quiet nod, the slight upward curve at the corner of his mouth when she completed a task correctly, was a currency more valuable than applause. The structure of Vernon's household was built around one unshakable pillar: education. Every evening, after dinner had been cleared and the dishes washed, Oprah was required to sit at the small, sturdy desk in her bedroom and devote herself to her studies. The lamp on the desk cast a tight circle of warm light, leaving the rest of the room in comfortable shadow, and in that cone of illumination, she delved into vocabulary lists, history chapters, and mathematical equations. Vernon enforced a strict limit on television, believing it to be a thief of time and ambition. Instead, he brought home newspapers and magazines, insisting she read a certain number of pages each night and write a report on what she had learned. The scratching of her pen on paper became the evening soundtrack, interrupted only by the turning of a page or the distant sound of crickets outside the window. At first, the regime chafed, but gradually, the discipline became its own comfort. The steady rhythm of study, the incremental mastery of a subject, the quiet pride in a completed assignment, these things filled her with a sense of growing competence, a knowledge that she was building herself, brick by brick, into someone capable and strong. Yet, within those disciplined walls, there was still room for the tender moments that shape a young soul. On Sunday mornings, Vernon would put on a record of gospel music, the rich voices of Mahalia Jackson or the soul stirrers filling the house with a deep, resonant calm. The two of them would sit in the living room, the sun slanting through the Venetian blinds in thin golden stripes, and listen. Vernon's eyes would close, his foot tapping gently to the rhythm, and Oprah would watch him, seeing in the softening of his features a story of his own arduous journey. He had come from a life of poverty and prejudice, had worked in coal mines and on railroads before finding his path, and the music seemed to carry all that history, all that pain and hope, into the room. They rarely spoke during these sessions. Words were unnecessary. The music, with its mournful lows and soaring highs, said everything. These hours of shared silence were a gift Vernon gave his daughter without knowing it, a demonstration that strength and tenderness could reside in the same human heart. She began to understand that discipline was not coldness, it was love made visible, love that demanded the best of someone because it believed in their potential. The Nashville neighborhood where they lived was a tapestry of quiet streets, modest homes with wide front porches, and the constant, friendly presence of neighbors who knew one another's business and cared about it. In the afternoons, when school was out and chores were done, Oprah would sometimes sit on the front porch and watch the world pass by. Children pedaled bicycles with playing cards clipped to the spokes, creating a soft, persistent rattle. An elderly woman in a floral dress watered her petunias with a gentle, swaying motion. The ice cream truck's distant melody would drift through the air, growing louder and then fading away. It was a community in the truest sense, a place where people looked out for one another, and it taught Oprah a different kind of lesson, that belonging was not only about blood, but about the daily. Incremental acts of kindness and recognition that knit a street into a family. She would wave to the mailman, who tipped his hat, and exchange recipes with the lady next door over the fence, discussing the best way to keep biscuits from turning out dry. These quiet interactions, lacking any drama, were the threads from which a sturdy social fabric was woven. Oprah's own voice continued to develop during these years, nurtured by both her father's insistence on elocution and her own natural curiosity. She joined the drama club at school, discovering the thrill of becoming someone else while remaining completely herself. The auditorium, with its heavy velvet curtains and the faint smell of dust and old wood, became a refuge of a new kind. Standing on the stage, bathed in the hot, white light of the spotlights, she felt a stillness descend, the same stillness she had experienced on her grandmother's porch, the same quiet focus she had found in the Milwaukee library. When she spoke, her voice resonated in the empty space, and she could feel it travel out and return, a palpable thing. The rehearsal process taught her patience and precision, and the director, a gentle English teacher with a worn cardigan and a soft voice, recognized something unique in her, not a desire for attention, but a deep desire to communicate, to make people feel something. It was a subtle but important distinction, and it shaped her approach to performance. She wasn't showing off, she was showing up, offering herself to the moment with a sincerity that was both rare and compelling. It was also during this time that Oprah took her first steps into the world of work that would define her life. Vernon, ever practical, believed in the dignity of a job, and he helped her secure a position at a local radio station. The building was a low, unassuming structure of beige brick, its interior a labyrinth of narrow hallways and soundproofed rooms that smelled of electronic equipment and coffee. The control room, where she first sat as a volunteer, was a sanctuary of soft, glowing dials and the gentle hum of amplifiers. Wearing heavy headphones that pressed her hair flat, Oprah learned to cue records, to read the time precisely, to lower her voice into the microphone with a calm, measured tone. The first time she heard her own voice broadcast over the air, a simple station identification spoken during a late-night program, she felt a shiver that was not excitement but recognition. It was the quietest possible confirmation, a whisper in the dark of the radio studio, that this was where she belonged. The other engineers, older men who had seen 1,000 young volunteers come and go, noticed the way she treated the microphone, not as a piece of equipment, but as a partner in conversation. She was gentle with it, precise with her words, and utterly without pretense. As her teenage years drew to a close, the girl who had once slept in a dresser drawer had transformed into a poised, intellectually curious young woman. Her grades were excellent, her speaking skills widely recognized, and she began to attract the attention of people in the wider community who saw in her a future different from the one prescribed by circumstance. The discipline her father had instilled was now a part of her internal machinery, a quiet engine that drove her forward not with frantic energy, but with steady purpose. She applied for and won an oratory contest that provided a full scholarship to Tennessee State University, a historically Black institution whose verdant campus and stately brick buildings promised a new horizon. The announcement came on a mild afternoon, the light in the barber shop soft and golden as Vernon took the call, his face nearly breaking into a full smile, the most Oprah had ever seen. He hung up the phone, looked at her, and simply said, "Well done." Those two words, spoken with a barber's economy of language, were a benediction. The family sat down to a dinner of fried chicken and greens, the kitchen warm with steam and satisfaction, and for a moment, all the years of struggle and striving seemed to converge in a point of perfect, peaceful achievement. The road ahead was still long, but for now, the Nashville chapter closed with the soft, satisfying click of a door settling into its frame.